Welcome, everybody. This is a new thing that the Friends of Fish Creek are starting this year. In the past, when you volunteered in more than one program, you would end up hearing the same information for probably the first half hour or so of each volunteer training session. So to make things more efficient for both volunteers and for staff, what we've decided to do this year is divide training into two parts. So this is the 2022 General Volunteer Training Part 1. It's for all new and returning volunteers. And Part 2 will be for your program-specific volunteer training sessions. And hopefully there will be less redundancy and duplication of information and less wasted time. So thank you for tuning in for this. Not sure why I can't. There we go. So the first thing we want to say is that we could not do what we do without you. We value every volunteer and we value every volunteer contribution. We run a lot of different programs and each one is coordinated by a different staff person or team of staff people. So there may be discrepancies in information. If you hear different information here than you hear in your program specific volunteer training session, please do take what you learn at your program specific volunteer training session as truth, as I may have gotten it wrong or maybe misrepresenting, but we have done our best to collaborate to create this. So there shouldn't be duplication or discrepancy, but if there is, go with what you learn at your program specific training session. So I want to start with the fact that Fish Creek Provincial Park, of course, has been around since it was opened to the public in 1975. As you can see by this map, the city of Calgary has grown around the park. The neighborhoods to the north were there when Fish Creek Provincial Park was established, but all those neighborhoods to the south and east were not. So Fish Creek Provincial Park used to be the outskirts of the city of Calgary. And now that it's completely 100% surrounded by urban development, that brings more challenges. The park was originally planned for an anticipated 250,000 visitors per year, and the park now sees well over 3 million visitors a year. So that's a 10-fold increase in usership compared to what the facilities and pathways and things were designed for, which exemplifies the need for our organization. Our goal as an organization, as the Friends of Fish Creek Provincial Park Society, is to cultivate what we call informed and responsible use of this much loved urban park. Every set of footsteps has an impact. And so if every person has a little bit of information and knowledge about how to protect the park when you visit, the park will be in better shape in the long run because of it. So that's our goal, trying to connect with people and educating people about how to use it, and also creating opportunities for people to engage meaningfully with each other and with nature. So the Friends of Fish Creek have been around since 1992. So this is our 30th year. We work really closely with staff at Alberta Environment and Parks. We also work with many different partnering organizations. Without these partnerships, we couldn't do half of what we do. Typically in a given year, we have over 800 members, over 200 active volunteers, and currently we have 7 staff. Our goal is to engage about 10,000 people a year, and we have a really great diversity of different funding sources. So if you become a Friends of Fish Creek member, those membership fees support the work we do. Any donations made, of course, go directly back into stewardship and education in the park. We do apply for many program-specific grants. We do a casino about every 18 months, and so that's a really great source of funding. Sponsorships as well, and program fees. So we operate on a social enterprise model, meaning that programs like the birding course and tours, any fees that are generated through that go right back into being invested into education and stewardship in Fish Creek Provincial Park. Here's just an example from last year. These are the different organizations that supported our work, whether it be through making donations financially or in kind, whether it be through providing office space like Alberta Parks does and venue space for our events and programs, or whether it's like the Harry and Martha Cohen Foundation or the Land Stewardship Center or the Bow River Basin Council that are that often award grants to us for our different projects and programs. So as I said before, our mission is to engage the community through activities and awareness to conserve a truly unique naturalized urban park. We see that Fish Creek Provincial Park provides wonderful value to the people that use it frequently. And we'd like that same benefit to be available for future generations. So if we are not here to connect the dots for people and cultivate informed and responsible use, this park might not be here to support people's physical and emotional well-being in the future. In 2017, we did a really neat research project called Project Impact. And through this project, we learned that taking part in our programs, taking advantage of opportunities to engage in really meaningful ways, both with other community members and with nature, supports both the natural communities and the human communities in the park. People's social and emotional and physical health were being supported by being involved, getting outside every day or regularly and being active and connecting in really meaningful ways is a real boost to our well-being. And so this was a really big learning for us in 2017. So because of this, we're working to improve access to nature. We've started a story map that contains some accessibility information. This is a living document. If you have ideas of things to share with us through our story map, please get in touch with Katie@friendsoffishcreek.org, and I would be happy to incorporate new ideas into the story map. Coming this year, we're going to be establishing the Beaver Tails Interpretive Loop Trail, and that is meant to be an accessible opportunity as well. It will take place on a 2-kilometer paved loop just east of the Bevo Grove Day Use area. And the content of each sign will be connected to the internet via a QR code where visitors can access the same content, but in 16 different languages and also with auditory content. So that's a big accessibility feature, and we're grateful to our volunteers who played a role in developing that trail, but also translating the signage. So thank you, everybody. Also new this year, we're running monthly Get to Know Nature events. These are outdoor events that take place typically on the 4th Saturday of the month. They're each themed, and they consist of many different outreach stations and opportunities for the public to engage in various ways relating to that theme. So for example, the April event on Saturday, April 23rd is Get to Know Rocks and Fossils. The May event on Saturday, May 25th is Get to Know Nature through Exploration and Play. So come on down. These events are completely free, open, and everyone is welcome. We also collaborate with partners to improve access. We've recently joined the Alberta Recreation Network's the Alberta Accessibility Network's Recreation Roundtable. And so we're working with groups to improve access for people with disabilities. We also have lots of volunteer opportunities of various kinds. Some are more accessible than others, of course. If you prefer a seated indoor job, we have some of those. If you prefer to be outdoors wielding a shovel, we have some of those. So we have something for everybody. We even have volunteer opportunities that people can do from home. So get in touch. So we engage the public on a continuum. On the left, you see recreation. So we host, in the past, we've hosted lots of wellness programs. This year, we'll just be running one of those, but recreation, things like coming down to the Get to Know Nature events or going on a tour. The education programs, going on a minibus tour, walking tour, taking part in one of our speaker series events, lots of opportunities to recreate and learn. And then also there's stewardship opportunities. And it's okay, we meet people where they're at. If people want to just come and recreate, that's okay. If they want to come and learn, that's okay. And if they want to come and be stewards, that's okay. All is good, and we invite everybody to take part wherever they would like to take part. So as I mentioned before, we're working to cultivate responsible use. So we're disseminating conservation messaging that helps people use the park more responsibly and in a more informed way that protects the park's ecosystems. So a really important document that all volunteers have to read is the Volunteer Handbook, which I'll be talking about in a moment. There's a conservation messaging section of that book on pages 17 to 19. Please read that. That's really important for all volunteers to be able to speak eloquently about conservation messaging. Things like why it's important to keep your pets on leash, why it's important to never take things home that you find in the park, like natural treasures like rocks and sticks, why it's important to not collect forest deadwood for your campfire, things like that. That's all in there. All volunteers play a role in this, whether you're a park watch steward or a Fish Creek ambassador, or you're out there pulling weeds or hosting a pop-up outreach station. These are all opportunities to engage the public and try to cultivate informed and responsible use. At our Get to Know Nature events, we've established a system of a conservation passport. So families and children that come to the event can pick up a conservation passport. And when they go to all the different outreach stations, once they've learned the conservation messaging that relates to that station. So for example, if they visit the bird station where they're learning about great horned owls, then they can get their passport stamped once they learn about the importance of not feeding birds in provincial parks and city parks, and the importance of giving wildlife their space. So if you're a birder, it's important to use that zoom lens for a photograph or binoculars to get an up close look without getting too close to birds. So all of our different programs can be divided into 4 different program categories: friend making and fundraising, education and wellness, grassland stewardship, and poplar stewardship. So under friend making and fundraising, we have a photo contest, we have a park watch program. You can see the volunteers on the left there doing their park watch thing. We run a I Love Fish Creek virtual fundraiser each fall. We have a casino, and we always need volunteers for that. I think currently there might still be some slots for the September casino coming up. We also have a community action team. This is a small group of very committed volunteers who help us make connections with businesses and other organizations that are looking to make financial or in-kind donations or sponsorships to organizations like ours. And of course, the Fish Creek Ambassador Program, so that's in the lower right. You can see a couple of our ambassadors there, and Pop-Up Outreach, which is very similar to the Ambassador Program, but it's an outdoor opportunity to engage the public. So if you like talking to people, if you like being active outdoors, these are great opportunities. Under the Education and Wellness Program, the Get to Know Nature events are a great opportunity to talk with the public and connect with them. There's a picture up here in the upper left. The Fish Creek Speaker Series, here's a picture in the lower left. Of course, this photo was taken pre-pandemic, back when we had our Speaker Series events indoors in the Environmental Learning Center. Currently, these events are taking place on Zoom. We hope to return to in-person programming in the near future. Learning Naturally School programs, you can see a picture here in the top, are a great opportunity for Canadian youth who, some of them are new to Canada, but typically they come from parts of Calgary that are a bit more economically disenfranchised. And so these are free programs that are hosted to these schools to make sure that all youth have some environmental education in their schooling. In the bottom middle, you'll see a youth checking out some birds with binoculars. That's part of our birding course. And then in the bottom right, you'll see minibus tours. We also run walking tours. And this year we'll be running our Good Grief program, which is a walking through grief and loss program. In terms of grassland stewardship, we do run a native plants garden. You can see that on the left of your screen. That's a picture when those plants were just little babies. Those plants look different now, but that's a little garden we have just outside of the cookhouse. And we have some committed volunteers that take care of and maintain that garden for us. If that interests you, let us know. We can see if with their space. Under vegetation management, we run 4 different programs there. There's the ATCO Heritage Grassland, which is a newly established plot of land established about 5 years ago, just southeast of the main parking area at the Bow Valley Ranch. And we're trying to encourage the growth of native grasses there and suppress the growth of those invasive species. The Weed Whackers and Weed Watchers program, Weed Whackers has been running for a long time. That consists of volunteers getting out there in the field with groups and under the guidance of Friends of Fish Creek staff and interns, and being taught about plant identification and then removing plants. So you can see some of our committed volunteers down there in the right that are pulling some scentless chamomile along the Bow River. That's an example of a Weed Whackers outing. Weed Watchers is new last year, and that's where volunteers are trained in plant identification, and they're given access to a digital app, and they walk along the park's pathways and looking for invasive species to report. The Sun Valley Drive project is the picture in the middle there. There's some really engaged citizens that live in the Sun Valley Drive area, and they are doing some mowing and invasive species control on top of the ridge at the south side of the park. And then, of course, there's weed biocontrol. So this is new for the Friends of Fish Creek as well. And this is where Friends of Fish Creek staff are working with partnering organizations like Alberta Environment and Parks to determine the best locations for biocontrol, which is essentially the release of specific insects that help to control specific invasive species. And then the last one there is Pick Up the Park. So this is an event that takes place typically in June each year, and it's a kind of a COVID-safe program where people sign up for an area of the park and they come and pick up their own cleanup kit. And then the day of, everyone goes out to their own areas of the park and does a big cleanup, leaving the garbage at a central place for trucks to pick up. In terms of poplar forest stewardship, of course, we run the Riparian Restoration and Poplar Planting Program. So the picture in the upper right there is one of our old restoration sites that was started back in 2015 near Hullswood. The Native Plants Nursery, so what that is, this is different from the Native Plants Garden. Across Fish Creek Provincial Park, in most of the grassland areas and riparian areas too, smooth brome grass is quite abundant. And it's so abundant, in fact, that it chokes out baby poplar trees. And so the point of this program is we know that we can't plant affordable tiny little poplar seedlings in our riparian restoration areas because the smooth brome grass just chokes them out and they die. So what we have to do is we purchase them small, or we rescue them from places in the park where they're not going to do very well. For example, in the ACTCO Heritage Grassland, if there's a lot of baby poplars there, we can transplant those into the Native Plants Nursery. And that's through a partnership with the Venturers Society. And they maintain and weed, and our own volunteers as well help with this. Weed those plants to make sure that they grow really well in the Native Plants Nursery. And once they're tall enough to outcompete the smooth brome grass, then we can transplant them back out into the park at our restoration sites. So beaver coexistence, we've been doing tree wrapping for a long time, and that's a way to deter beavers from certain areas that have sensitive infrastructure that might be damaged by beaver activity. But new in 2020 was our beaver coexistence pilot project. So that was an area, there's a picture there in the upper middle. That was an area where beaver activity had caused the flooding of major pathways that are well loved by park visitors. And so we worked with partnering organizations and got funding through the Watershed Resiliency and Restoration Program. And we engaged an amazing team of volunteers who have built in total now 5 beaver coexistence devices. So these keep the water level behind the dams low enough to alleviate pathway flooding or prevent pathway flooding, but still allow beavers the depth of water they need to survive winter. So the picture here is the 5th device that was just installed in June 2021. We also engage volunteers to be riparian health monitors. So that's a program that's a collaboration between us and the Cows and Fish. And volunteers are trained in how to identify native and invasive species of plants and shrubs that are present in riparian areas in the park. And they choose areas and go and assess them in terms of riparian health, and also assess them in terms of feasibility for future restoration work. So that's really important. It helps to inform our riparian restoration plans. And then, of course, we have our mapping, monitoring, and maintenance. So those are volunteers that are taught how to use the digital app, and they are helping to map and monitor and even maintain our restoration sites and other stewardship projects across the park's land base. So in order to be a volunteer for the Friends of Fish Creek, there are 3 things that everybody needs to do and 1 that some volunteers need to do. So all volunteers need to complete a volunteer agreement. All volunteers need to use My Impact page, and all volunteers need to read the Volunteer Handbook annually. Police checks are only for certain volunteers. So the volunteer agreement is a written agreement between the Friends of Fish Creek and each volunteer. It's only to be completed once, but it must be completed before work begins. And it does a few things. It acts as a confidentiality agreement. It acts as a photo release waiver. It acts as acknowledgement that you are covered under our workers' compensation plan should you get injured while volunteering. It acknowledges all kinds of things, like that you will follow instructions and follow safety protocols, that you will read and follow the information in the volunteer handbook, things like that. So it's a great document. It's really comprehensive. We really recommend everybody read it thoroughly before signing it. And if you're signing it if you're under the age of 18, then your adult or guardian needs to sign it as well. My Impact page is an online platform we use to manage volunteers. Once you create an account, you can indicate your program interests, and that's a very important piece because when we send emails out saying, hey, there's a training session for riparian health assessments, for example, we will only send it to the people who have checked off riparian health assessments in their list of program interests, because we don't want to inundate everybody with everything. So please check off your program interests. We encourage everybody to revise their program interests every January, revisit that, because in February, March is when we start sending those emails out. There's an About You section where you can update things like, who is your emergency contact? Do you have any allergies or medical conditions we should know about if we're going to be with you working in the field? There's also an opportunity for you to indicate your privacy settings. So this software is really big on privacy, and it is set up, the default is set up so that you are set up as anonymous. So when somebody else goes into an opportunity, a volunteer shift, and clicks that little person icon to see who else has signed up, you will just show up as anonymous. But you can go into your account, and over on the right there, you'll see my profile. And under there, you'll find a little menu, and in there is privacy settings. And you can indicate that you're happy to share your first name, or your first name and last name, or your first name and your picture, whatever you like. So other people can see that, you know, Jane is going to be volunteering, and here's a picture of Jane. Whatever suits you. We just like to let people know that that's there. There is also a feature within the system where you can set up automatic email shift reminders. Friends of Fish Creek staff do not have the capacity to send out shift reminders before every volunteer shift. And so that's something that we encourage you to sign up for. It's a bit counterintuitive when you go into it. If you see a green check mark, that actually means that you're not signed up. So read it carefully and make sure that it says you are subscribed or you are not subscribed, depending on what you would like. And the way that works is it will only send an email out if you have something in the next 2 weeks, and it will send that email out, I think, every weekend. So if you don't have anything signed up, you won't get an email. Each year, every volunteer is asked to reread the Volunteer Handbook. We do revisions every year in January, February, and those revisions are always highlighted to make it really easy for you to just skim through and just read the parts that are new. The most important part of the document is the second half. It's the safe work practice documents. And so about halfway through the document, you'll find a spreadsheet that shows, you know, if you're interested in Park Watch, these are the safe work practice documents you need to read. So you don't necessarily need to read all of them, but the ones that relate to your volunteer role or roles, you absolutely need to read. And we ask that you follow them and revisit them frequently so you're very familiar with the information. Of course, it's really important to us to create a safe and secure environment for all volunteers. And so part of that is police checks. We want to make sure that we don't have persons in the community who may be putting others at risk through criminal behavior. So some of our volunteers need to get a police information check and a vulnerable sector search. Once you get one and you continue to be involved with the organization, you don't need to get one again until if you disappear for a little while and then you come back, then you'll need to get it again. What else? Oh, right. So then, of course, the Volunteer Handbook is really important. There's a link to that in many different places that you can access, and I'll tell you about that shortly. Also, one volunteer or one staff on each outing or each shift must complete the first 5 and last 5 minutes forms and share that safety information with your fellow volunteers. So we'll cover that off in a few minutes as well. So back to police information checks. These are the programs that require a police information check and vulnerable sector search. So you can read that list. A couple of them, minibus drivers and the stewardship truck crew, those are only for experienced volunteers, not brand new volunteers. Those are kind of a invite only type volunteer opportunity, and a driver's abstract is required for that. So, and also filling out forms to make sure you're on our insurance and things like that. Here are the programs that don't require police checks. So if you're interested in doing more indoor stuff, stewardship outings where there are staff here, speaker series and other online events, if you want to help with installing signs or fencing or building the brick pathway out in front of the office, helping out at get to know nature events, doing the photo ID work associated with the Calgary Captured program. This is done at home. So again, no police check required. Learning Naturally School programs, the adult volunteers associated with that program do get checks, but it's coordinated by the schools, not by us. And same thing with casino, those volunteers, such as managers that need them, the AGLC does their own background check. I guess I should go backwards. The reason these volunteers require a police information check and a vulnerable sector search is for a few reasons. It could be because they're given keys or access codes to access different parts of the park. It could be because they are given really expensive equipment to use, or it could be because they're representing the Friends of Fish Creek in a kind of more legal way, like the board of directors. So they're, and possibly having control over finances and things like that. So that's why those volunteers need it. And then the other reason is if they're working closely with vulnerable populations. So for example, our tour assistants and tour guides and good grief volunteers, for example, they will be working with people who have recently, not tours, but the good grief volunteers, the companions, will be working directly with individuals who are experiencing grief and loss. And so these folks are vulnerable at that time in their life. And so we don't want to partner them up with somebody who might prey upon them. 2 important forms. So at the beginning of each shift, one person, whether it be a volunteer or staff, needs to complete the first 5 minutes form. The point of the first 5 minutes is to give you an opportunity to acknowledge the potential safety hazards that exist in a given work environment or work task. So you fill out the form and then you go over all the safety, potential safety hazards with everybody who is taking part in that outing. So that's the first 5 minutes. The last 5 minutes is a form you complete at the end of the volunteer shift. It gives you an opportunity to collect stats, to enter stats, like how many people did you engage, how many trees did you wrap or unwrap, how many kilograms of weeds did you pull. But it also gives you an opportunity to share your ideas and suggestions for program improvement, or to let us know that we're all out of plastic bags, or the shovel broke, anything like that. It's a way to connect back with Friends of Fish Creek staff, and we check those form entries weekly, and we aim to get back to people in a timely manner to follow up on any concerns or information that was shared with us. In order to access the first 5 and last 5 minute forms, you can go to the Friends of Fish Creek website, so friendsofishcreek.org/5 minutes. You can also find, and please do set a bookmark if you use a smartphone or a tablet in the field, set a bookmark so it's easy for you to access. You can also access it through the My Impact app, which we'll be talking about shortly. So just to cover off first aid. So first aid is not a requirement for any of our volunteer positions, nor is the provision of first aid, but it is a requirement sometimes to carry a first aid kit. So the reason we make it not a requirement is this is to protect you from liability. So the Emergency Medical Aid Act stipulates that anybody providing first aid for whom it is a requirement to provide first aid is being held to the same standard as professional emergency responders and healthcare providers. If you're a volunteer who took a first aid course 2 years ago and never have an opportunity to practice, it's unethical for us to hold you to the same standard as people who do this professionally on a daily basis. And so we've made it that training, first aid training and provision of first aid to anybody that needs it is not a requirement. But we do ask that, if you come upon somebody who needs help, even if you're not comfortable performing the help, at least ask if they're okay and call 911 if needed, or offer to call their spouse or their family member to come pick them up. So you can be of help even if you're not comfortable providing first aid. First aid training may be available for certain volunteers, like lead volunteers. So if you're interested in this, get in touch with us. Some volunteers are required to carry a number 2 first aid kit. Kits are sealed with what we call breakaway ties. So you'll see in the picture there in the upper right, these are not the same as regular cable ties or zip ties. These are breakable with your hands. And inside the kit is inside a plastic bag. And inside the kit is an incident report form, pencils, masks, disposable gloves, and bandages. So if all you need is a little bandage, then please just use the ones that are there. Don't open the kit for that. If you do open the kit, then it means you need to complete the incident report form and bring the kit back to the Friends of Fish Creek as soon as possible so that we can replenish the kit and follow up with any injured people. Both the kit and the form have to be brought in to us. So in the back of the Volunteer Handbook, you'll find the Safe Work Practice documents. The link to the Volunteer Handbook can be found also on the first 5 minutes form. So however you're accessing that form, you can always find the Volunteer Handbook. So you can always refresh on the safety information found in the Safe Work Practice documents that relate to your given program or your volunteer role or task. We really ask that all volunteers be familiar with all the safe work practices that pertain to your volunteer role. And if you don't comply, we do have a disciplinary process that we could trigger should we need to. For example, if your role is using a certain tool and that tool requires ear protection and eye protection and you're refusing to wear it, then first we'll talk to you and maybe we'll ask you to no longer do that. But there is a formal disciplinary process that could be enacted if needed. But we've never had to do that because of all of our volunteers are so amazing. The most important safe work practice as well, not that it's the most important, but it's definitely critical, is the respectful workplace safe work practice. It's really important that we keep our, be careful about our language and try to make sure we're not unintentionally offending somebody by comments so we want to make sure everybody's aware of ways that we can all work together to create a respectful workplace. As I mentioned before, we do have a workers' compensation policy and all volunteers are covered under that, but injuries must be reported to us within 48 hours so that we can report them to WCB. Fish Creek Provincial Park is an urban park. So if there's any kind of emergency, you can always call 911. The 3 kinds of emergency that we typically feel are plausible. One is wildfire. So if you see I'm not talking about a campfire in a designated pit. I'm talking about, trees or grass on fire and it's uncontrolled. Then yes, call 911. Crime in progress. If you see someone breaking into a building or a vehicle or, assaulting somebody, there can be a number of different doing graffiti or causing vandalism to different park facilities. Those are all crimes in progress. And serious medical concerns. So anything that is life-threatening. We're not talking about paper cuts here, but things like heart attacks, stroke, somebody that's unconscious. So those are all times that you would just call 911. There is good 911 service pretty much everywhere in the park, but there are a few little spots, mostly at the base of hills. So if you're ever trying to call 911 and don't have cell service, or ever trying to use your phone and don't have cell service, you can just move away from the closest hill and chances are service will pick back up. Throughout the park, there are emergency locator signs. So as you can see the picture on the right, this is what they look like up close. FC, of course, stands for Fish Creek, and then the number 048. And there's a reminder to call 911. On the left, you can see the kind of example of where these signs are located. So this kiosk is located in front of the Fish Creek Environmental Learning Center at Shannon Terrace. And the little yellow diamond there is that emergency locator. So if you're ever calling 911, it's always wise to look around you and see if you can find a park map. If you can find a park map, chances are you can find the FC, whatever number it is. And in theory, that number should help the emergency EMS to locate exactly where you are. Just be aware, if you can see my cursor right now, see how on each sign there's a little yellow diamond? That is just a sample. That is not the emergency locator sign. So the emergency locator sign is always separate from the map sign. New this year, we've developed a field question resolution map. For those of you who are Fish Creek ambassadors, this will look familiar to you. It's very similar to what you've been trained to use for questions by visitors in the visitor center, but this is more for in the outdoors. So level 1 are general observations and questions. So things like, what happens if I find a deceased animal? What if there's a general issue or question for Alberta Environment and Parks? What are the park hours? Questions about the Friends of Fish Creek in our programming, ways to reach us, and general Fish Creek Provincial Park inquiries. So that's kind of level 1, nothing urgent, but the best thing to do is to always either give people the information. If they want hours, you can give it to them. But if they have a general question or issue or concern, ask them to email fishcreek@gov.ab.ca. That's a relatively new email address that has been enacted as a public portal for people to submit their thoughts and comments about the park. And it's best for us to let the public submit their own so that AEP can get back to that person individually rather than us submit comments on behalf of other people. So level 2 are urgent situations requiring response. So small injured wildlife, let's say a bird, a cat, a muskrat, this is who you call. Large animal concern like an injured moose or carnivore sightings. Facility issues, let's say you're trying to have a picnic at the Bow Valley Ranch and you can't stop hearing this alarm going off. That's an example of something that requires response. Or you see flooding, you see water pouring out of a building or something. Then you can call Kananaskis Emergency Services at 403-591-7755. Or if you have a complaint or issue directly related to Fish Creek, you can submit the concern here. So this is the same email address listed here, but some people might have a more, let's say they just noticed a sinkhole in a pathway. Well, that's a little bit more urgent, and so, but still it's the same thing. Contact that number there. At the bottom, you'll see level 3. So these are our emergencies requiring emergency medical services. So these are life-threatening medical or wildfire, crime in progress. And so you want to call 911, just like we said before. And once the situation is under control, please contact Friends of Fish Creek staff so you can get in touch with your program coordinator via email or telephone, whatever works for you. But we always like to know, especially if 911 has been called. So friendly reminders, please read the Volunteer Handbook. Every year we send out an email in the winter to let everybody know that the latest version has been updated. And so it's good winter reading, sit by the fire with a cup of tea and read the Volunteer Handbook. If you haven't already completed a volunteer agreement, please get in touch with us. And you can also access that document right in My Impact page as well. You can review the safe work practices before you begin work. That's always a good idea, especially for things like stewardship or working with the truck. Always good reminders on safe work practices. Make sure one volunteer or staff completes the first 5, last 5 at every shift and shares the safety information from the first 5 with the group. Find volunteer opportunities that match your interests, skills, abilities, and limitations. Only you can decide what volunteer opportunities are best for you. And so that's entirely your responsibility to make sure you find things that relate. If you're having difficulty finding that, you can always send an email to katie@friendsofishcreek.org and we can set up a time to chat and we can work together to find something that works for you. That would be especially helpful if you have accessibility concerns. Feel free to get in touch. I'm really trying to work to improve accessibility for everybody. Participate only within instruction and scope of activity. So if you start doing things outside of what we're asked to do or using tools in ways they're not designed for, that's a recipe for a little bit of an injury. So we want to make sure everybody's only doing what they've been taught to do and what tools are used for. All injuries or incidents must be reported within 48 hours. And just a reminder that safety is everyone's responsibility. So tools and PPE, personal protective equipment, are provided for all outings that require it. Of course, if you would like to bring your own safety glasses, hearing protection, gloves, or favorite tools, we won't stop you. Especially with COVID, we did start asking people to bring their own gloves, safety glasses as well. But we do have these on site. So if you can't provide them, we definitely have them. So volunteer hours. I know some people don't care too much about tracking volunteer hours, but it's really important to us. It allows us to show the level of effort required to do what we do, and it also supports funding applications and reports. Most funders don't want to fund a project 100%. So let's say a project is going to cost $5,000. When we factor in the value of the volunteer contributions in time, then often that amount actually outweighs the actual financial cost of running the program in staff time and in any materials we need to purchase, mileage, posters. And so it's great on grant applications when we can say, it's going to cost $5,000. That's what we're asking from you. But our volunteers are putting in $7,000 worth of time and effort. And Alberta Parks is providing X number of dollars in terms of venue space. So really, you're only paying for 30% of the project. So it is really, really helpful for us to have an accurate estimate of volunteer hours. So here's a guide of when you need to track your own hours and when you don't. So if you're at a volunteer outing where staff are present, you do not need to log your hours. The staff will log the hours for the whole group at once. That's the most efficient way to do it. When you're at a volunteer outing in the park where no staff are present, so let's say, for example, you and your partner are out on a Calgary captured shift or a park watch shift, or you're doing a fence monitoring shift or a data collection shift, all of those, you must use the mobile time clock. And the reason for that, we need you to do that rather than just logging your hours when you get home, because if in the event that there was, say, a major park emergency, let's say all of a sudden there's a cougar or there's a tornado, and we need to quickly know who is in the park right now. How do we get our volunteers out of harm's way? That's why we need the mobile time clock. We go to that list and it shows these 3 volunteers are in the field, and we would call all 3 of those volunteers on their cell phones. So please do make sure your cell phone is, the volume is on when you're working so that we can reach you should there be an emergency. And then the last category is volunteer work done at home. You log your own hours for this, but you can do it just on the computer. You don't have to use the mobile time clock, because we're not keeping an eye out for emergencies in your neighborhood, right? We're keeping an eye out for emergencies in the park. So you only need to use the mobile time clock when your shift involves being in the park. So the mobile time clock, so like I said before, we need to be able to pull up a list of the volunteers that are in the park at a given moment in the event of a park emergency. So some volunteers sign up for shifts like weed pulls, but those who don't sign up for shifts and that don't have staff on site and need to go to the park to volunteer need to use the mobile time clock. So in order to be able to do that, you access it through the My Impact app. So if you go to the App Store or the Google Play Store and search My Impact, this is what it looks like. Right here, this green and orange is the little icon. And once you install it on your phone or your smart device, this is what it will look like, My Impact. Once you go in, once you sign up for an activity or shift through My Impact page, then you can record your hours using the mobile time clock. So what happens is you download and activate the app. Then it will show up on your homepage or on your screen. You might have to surf around your phone trying to find that icon. And if you can't find it anywhere, you can also always go back to that Google Play Store or the App Store and search that app. And if you've already installed it on your phone, there will be a button that says open. So then you can just open it from there. So once you've opened the account or the app, you would sign into your account, click the first 5 minutes. Click on the first 5 minutes link, complete the first 5 minutes form, then go back to My Impact and click Start Clock. This will prompt you to choose the activity for which you are doing. And then when your volunteer shift is over, then you would click the last 5 minutes, complete the last 5 minutes form, then go back to My Impact and click Stop Clock. Another screen will pop up that says click Stop Clock again. So that's how you do it. And if you started at 9 and finish at 12, then it will automatically log 3 hours for you. So that's the app that we encourage all volunteers to use. This one, the digital app, this is only for specific volunteers and specific volunteer training volunteer programs. So if you're doing mapping, monitoring, and maintenance, for example, if you're doing park watch, so there's Beaver Coexistence, you would be using this app. And so I'm not going to get too into detail here, but it's called ArcGIS Field Maps, and you can search for it in the App Store or the Google Play Store by searching ArcGIS Field Maps. It allows the capture of all sorts of information, and it links it to the location and allows you to upload photos. So it's really interesting. The logon information would be provided to you during your program-specific volunteer training session. So what to bring for general volunteers? Always bring your cell phone charged up and with important phone numbers saved. We ask that you also turn on your volume so that if there's a park emergency and we need to reach you, you can answer the phone. Bring water. There are several places in the park where you can refill your water bottles. Extra clothing layers are always important in Alberta. You just never know what the weather's going to be like. Last Saturday, we had an event with the Get to Know Nature event, and we all thought it was going to be a high of +8. Nobody wore toques, and all of a sudden the wind picked up and everyone was freezing. So it's really important to bring those extra clothing layers, even if you think you're not going to need them. A snack's always a good idea. Your partner, for sure, volunteers should never work alone, and any equipment you need for your role. But of course, you'll always want to bring your smile and your positive attitude. Things you might want to leave at home, valuables. Of course, you need to have your cell phone with you and possibly your keys, but we don't recommend bringing valuables with you, Don't wear those diamond earrings when you're volunteering. Pets, there are certain programs like Park Watch and Calgary Captured where you can bring your pet, but we ask that if you're doing, engaging in a group event with 10 or 20 other people, that you don't bring pets, or if you're helping to host an event, please don't bring pets. Earbuds are not a great idea because they impact your ability to be fully aware of your surroundings, and that's a safety issue for anyone, whether you're walking, cycling, or volunteering in the park. And of course, glass water bottles, we don't recommend those because if they break, it causes quite a mess and a safety hazard. What to wear. So sturdy, comfortable footwear that is closed toe is very much encouraged for all volunteer outings. There are some volunteer outings where you will be encouraged to wear long sleeves and long pants, for example, tree wrapping, because there's a bit of a hazard there with the sharp edges on the wire. But otherwise, wear your Friends of Fish Creek hat or t-shirt or vest if you have one. Definitely bring extra layers to be comfortable, warm, and dry. And of course, in different seasons, you might want to bring sunscreen hat, mitts and a toque, sunglasses to protect you from the elements. We encourage youth volunteers in the Friends of Fish Creek. If volunteers are under the age of 15, the parent and guardian must sign the volunteer agreement and accompany the youth when volunteering. It's a kind of assessed on a case-by-case basis. So we have had volunteers 14, 15 years old who after the first outing, they were told, you don't need to bring your parent anymore, you're good. But we just don't want to put any of our fellow volunteers in a position where they're essentially babysitting somebody else's child. So under 15, both parent has to sign the volunteer agreement and must accompany the youth when volunteering the first few times. 16 to 17 years of age, the youth can volunteer on their own, but the parent or guardian must still sign their volunteer agreement. So it's best for them to arrive the day of with the youth, just to make sure everybody knows everybody, everybody's good, and then the youth can volunteer on their own. Then 18 years of age, they can sign their own volunteer agreement because at that point they're legally an adult. And youth do need their own MyImpact account once they have their own email address. So in this picture here, this is Tomo and Yuzuki. Yuzuki does not have her own MyImpact page account, and that is okay right now. But once she's 12 or 14 or 15 or whatever, we'll want her own MyImpact page account then. Volunteering with pets, we did touch on this earlier. But the important thing to remember here is if you are bringing a pet to volunteering, you are representing the Friends of Fish Creek, and it is critical that you set a good example for visitors. So your pet needs to be on leash and under control at all times. You must always pick up its waste and properly dispose of it in a garbage receptacle or bring it home for composting. And you must check with your fellow volunteers prior to arriving with your pets. You just don't know if who you've been partnered up with might be afraid of dogs or allergic to dogs, for example. So it's always important to check. And this does not work for large events or larger group outings like field work. So one of our, I didn't realize that was an animated GIF. That's hilarious. One of our ways that we like to say thank you to volunteers is by, we've created a volunteer lending library. So you can borrow things like bungee pump poles, which are on the right there, snowshoes, field guides, pocket guides, and also maps. There are books, there are videos, there are all kinds of things in our volunteer appreciation lending library. And Emma's going to be sending an email out to everybody to remind them how to use the volunteer lending library, because we haven't done that in a while. And it's you have to have a password to access it on our website. We also run annual volunteer appreciation events. So typically in the fall or early winter, we'll host some sort of dinner. The last couple of years, of course, it's all been online because of the pandemic. So hopefully at some point we'll be able to get back to in-person programming. And then in every fall, usually in November, we send out an annual volunteer experience survey. This is your opportunity to share any feedback you have. We want to know, do you feel safe? Are things well organized? Do you feel like your role and purpose are meaningful to you? Things like that. But we also welcome volunteer feedback throughout the year, in person, on the phone, email. We're a really grassroots organization. We take feedback from our volunteers to heart, and typically we incorporate any feedback or ideas for improvement that come our way. So next steps, you need to create a MyImpact page account if you don't already have one. And if you do, update or revise your program interests. Download the MyImpact app to your cell phone or smart device. Complete a volunteer agreement if you haven't already, and then upload this to your profile in My Impact page. Read the Volunteer Handbook, please, please, please. I've heard it's not so bad, but it is long. And if you prefer a paper copy of the Volunteer Handbook, it is too long to print. So we do have one copy of it that we're loaning out to volunteers. So if you would like it, then email your program coordinator and ask if you can be put on the list to borrow the Volunteer Handbook. Maybe we should add that to our volunteer lending library. And then, of course, program season is right around the corner. So sign up for your training sessions or any outings that suit your interests and abilities, and we look forward to working with you. If you have any questions about this, about any of the information here, you can email info@friendsoffishcreek.org and include the program name in the subject line. And that way, Chris, who receives those emails, will forward your email on to the appropriate staff person. If you already know who your coordinator is, you can just email them directly, absolutely. But if you're not sure, if you're thinking, oh, I want to hear more about this Calgary Captured thing, then send an email to info@friendsofFishcreek.org and put Calgary Captured in the subject line, and Chris will forward it on to whoever's responsible. The other way to get in touch would be to call our main office line at 403-238-3841. You can listen to the staff directory and then select the number that corresponds to the staff that is responsible for that program that you're interested in. So it will say, for dedication benches, for legacy bricks, for membership, press 1 for Chris, for example. So you can go through the directory and get in touch over the phone as well. And I'd like to thank all our photographers that are listed at the bottom there who donated photos for this presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope it saves you some time in this year's volunteer trainings. Take good care.